The last sliver of the sun bled out behind the jagged peaks of the Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and orange. I lowered my phone. The image of Madison smiling in the dying light saved to my camera roll, a perfect, crystalline moment. She was kneeling by the fire pit, her face illuminated by the first hesitant flames, poking at the kindling with a stick. "Get a good one?" she asked, not looking up. Her voice was the only sound that mattered. "The best," I said, zipping the phone into my jacket pocket. "Future blackmail material for when you're a big-shot lawyer." She laughed, a sound that was crisp and clear in the mountain air. "You'd better have a good prenup, Hayes." We'd driven out from Seattle that morning, escaping the relentless gray drizzle and the even more relentless hum of the city. Here in this remote pocket of the Olympic National Forest, the air was supposed to be clean, the world quiet. Our tent, a sturdy four-season model I'd spent too much money on, was pitched on a flat patch of earth a good 50 yards from our car. We were surrounded by a fortress of Douglas firs and ancient cedars, their colossal forms draped in moss that hung like the beards of sleeping giants. It was an idyll, a perfect postcard of Pacific Northwest wilderness. But as true darkness settled, a different kind of quiet fell. The usual nighttime chorus I'd come to expect from my hikes, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small things in the undergrowth, was absent. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, expectant. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. I shivered, pulling my fleece tighter. Is it just me, or is it too quiet? Madison finally looked up from her work, the fire now crackling with a satisfying roar. She tilted her head, listening. It is quiet. Probably the elevation. Or maybe all the critters are just shy. She was the pragmatist, the lawyer who dealt in facts and evidence. I was the designer, the one who saw unsettling shapes in shadows. That's when we heard it. It came from deep within the woods, a sound that cut through the silence like a razor. It was a sharp, percussive crack, like a massive tree branch snapping under immense weight. But then it came again, and a third time, with a steady, unnatural rhythm. It wasn't the random chaos of nature. It sounded deliberate, purposeful. What was that? I whispered, my eyes scanning the impenetrable wall of blackness beyond our firelight. Deer, maybe? Madison offered, though her voice had lost some of its confidence. Or a bear. We should put the food away. The thought of a bear was unnerving but manageable. We diligently gathered every scrap of food, every wrapper, and sealed it in the hard plastic bear canister, which we then wedged securely between two large rocks 100 feet from our tent, just like the pamphlets told us to. Back inside the tent, zipped securely in our sleeping bags, the fabric walls felt like a suit of armor. The world outside, with its strange sounds and suffocating silence, was banished. We were safe. It was an illusion that would last for only a few more hours. I was ripped from a deep sleep by a violent roar of wind that wasn't wind. The tent wall beside me bowed inward, and the air filled with the sound of ripping nylon, loud as a gunshot. Before my sleep-addled brain could even process the violation, something tore through the side of the tent as if it were tissue paper. A silhouette, impossibly tall and gaunt, blotted out the moonlight. It was a nightmare sketch of a man, all sharp angles and starved limbs. I saw a hand, or what passed for one, plunge into the tent. 3 long, skeletal fingers, tipped with what looked like yellowed claws, clamped around Madison. Her scream was a bolt of pure terror, but it was choked off almost instantly, a wet, gurgling sound that would be burned into my memory forever. I scrambled, tangling myself in my sleeping bag, my mind a blank screen of white-hot panic. The silhouette recoiled, pulling her from the tent with effortless, horrifying speed. Maddie! The name was a strangled croak. I thrashed my way out of the shredded remains of the tent, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The cold night air hit me like a physical blow. I fumbled for my backpack, my fingers closing around the cold metal of my high-lumen flashlight. I thumbed it on, the powerful beam cutting a stark white tunnel through the darkness. And there they were. The tracks. They weren't the prints of a bear or any animal I knew. They were monstrously humanoid, the deep impression of a long, narrow heel and 3 impossibly long toe prints dug deep into the soft earth, each tipped with a slash mark from a claw. They led away from the ruined camp, heading straight into the black maw of the forest. My first thought was the rangers. My phone. But there was no service here. The station was miles away, hours even by car. They wouldn't get here until morning at the earliest. By then, the tracks would be gone. The rain, the wind, or the creature itself would erase them. Maddie would be gone. Adrenaline surged through me, a chemical fire that burned away all rational thought. There was no choice. There was only the trail. I couldn't wait. I couldn't let that thing take her. I ripped open my pack, my mind racing. Water bladder full, first aid kit, survival knife, still in its sheath. Lighter. It wasn't an arsenal, it was a joke, but it was all I had. The thought of what Maddie was enduring, alone in the dark with that creature, was a spur digging into my soul. Staying here was a death sentence for her. Going after her was likely a death sentence for me. I chose the latter. "Maddie!" I screamed into the woods, my voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. The only answer was the faint, mocking echo. I plunged into the darkness, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, illuminating a chaotic slideshow of giant ferns, moss-covered logs, and the ever-present monolithic trees. My feet slipped on wet roots, branches whipped at my face. But I kept moving, my eyes locked on the ground. The tracks were easy to follow at first. Here, a scuff mark. There, a snapped sapling. On the broad leaf of a fern, a single glistening drop of blood. It was hers. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror and rage through me. I pushed harder, running recklessly through the unfamiliar terrain, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. For what felt like an eternity, maybe an hour, the chase was all that existed. The beam of my light, the burn in my legs, and the tracks leading me deeper into hell. Then, they just stopped. I was standing at the edge of a wide, rock-strewn wash where a creek might run in the spring. Now, it was just a jumble of smooth, gray stones. The tracks led to the edge of the rocks and then vanished. I swept my light back and forth, my beam dancing over the stones. Nothing. No scuffs, no broken twigs, no prints in the patches of sand between the rocks. It was as if the creature had simply ceased to exist, dissolving into the very air. I spun in a slow circle, the beam of my flashlight cutting uselessly into the surrounding darkness. I was lost, utterly, hopelessly lost. And the trail was cold. The only chance I had to find Madison had vanished on a bed of cold, silent stones. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I sank to my knees on the cold stones of the creek bed, the beam of my flashlight wavering. My mind, which had been a laser focused on the tracks, was now a maelstrom of failure and fear. I had failed. Maddie was gone, and I was alone, lost in a forest that felt ancient and malevolent. A loud snap from the trees behind me sent a jolt of pure electricity up my spine. I whipped around, aiming the flashlight into the darkness I'd just come from. 2 small points of light glinted back at me from the undergrowth. My blood ran cold. The creature. It had circled back. It was toying with me. But then the form took shape, lumbering out of the brush, and my terror shifted into a different, more primal key. It wasn't the gaunt, skeletal thing from my tent. This was a wall of black fur and muscle. An American black bear, and it was enormous, easily 400 pounds. It sniffed the air, its head swaying from side to side. It must have smelled the blood on the ferns, or maybe just my own sweat-drenched fear. Its presence here now felt like a cruel joke from the universe. It took a step toward me and let out a low, guttural huff. I scrambled backward, my hand scraping against the rough stones. All the advice I'd ever read flashed through my mind. Make yourself look big, make noise, don't run. I staggered to my feet, waving my arms and the flashlight erratically.
Hey, get out of here, go on, get!
My voice was a pathetic, cracking squeak. The bear was not impressed. It wasn't curious or cautious. It was agitated, its space invaded. With a deafening roar that vibrated in my bones, it rose onto its hind legs, towering over me, a black monolith of claws and teeth against the night sky. This was it. This was how it ended. Chasing a monster only to be killed by a simple animal. I stumbled backward over a root I hadn't seen and fell hard, my head cracking against a stone. The flashlight flew from my grasp, its beam spinning crazily across the canopy above. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. I could smell its foul, meaty breath. I threw an arm over my face in a useless gesture of self-preservation. And then, from the periphery, a blur of gray motion. It erupted from the shadows on the far side of the creek bed with impossible speed. It wasn't a blur. It was a wolf, but a wolf of mythic proportions. It was massive, its shoulders easily as high as the bear's, its fur a shifting pattern of charcoal and silver in the moonlight. It moved with a liquid grace that belied its incredible size. With no sound, no warning bark, the wolf slammed into the bear's flank. The impact was brutal, sending the larger animal staggering sideways with a grunt of surprise and pain. The fight that followed was a whirlwind of savage violence. The bear was pure force, swiping with paws that could crush a skull. But the wolf was a specter of speed and precision. It ducked and weaved around the clumsy attacks, its powerful jaws snapping shut on the bear's thick hide, tearing away chunks of fur and flesh. The forest filled with the roars of the bear and the guttural, business-like snarls of the wolf. I lay on the ground, paralyzed by a mix of awe and terror, watching the titanic struggle. The bear, bellowing in a symphony of fury and pain, was clearly losing. The wolf was a master combatant, a born killer. A final, deep bite to the bear's shoulder earned a pained squeal. The great beast had had enough. It turned, crashing ignominiously back into the undergrowth, its whimpers of pain fading into the distance. The massive wolf stood in the center of the creek bed, its sides heaving. It turned its head, and its intelligent, pale yellow eyes fixed on me. It didn't growl, didn't move toward me. It simply watched, blood dripping from its muzzle onto the pale stones. Shadow. Enough. The voice was low and calm, and it came from the trees behind the wolf. A figure emerged, moving with the same silent grace. It was a woman, or maybe a girl, it was hard to tell. She was dressed in practical, dark-colored clothes, that looked like a mix of modern fabrics and cured hides. A long knife was sheathed at her belt, and a simple, powerful-looking longbow was slung over her shoulder. She walked directly to the giant wolf and laid a hand on the thick fur of its neck. The wolf, Shadow, leaned into her touch. She looked at me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Her eyes were dark and piercing. "You all right?" I pushed myself up, my voice trembling. My girlfriend, a thing. Something took her. From our tent." I stammered, trying to explain the skeletal form, the claws, the unnatural speed. She listened without a flicker of surprise, her gaze never leaving my face. When I finished, she simply nodded, as if I'd just described a common weather pattern. "She was taken by a Wendigo," she stated, the name falling from her lips with a chilling finality. She glanced at the direction the tracks had disappeared. "You're lucky. This one wasn't a standard hungry spirit, it's different. It doesn't feed right away. We might still have time." Hope, a dangerous and fragile thing, flared in my chest. "Help me," I pleaded, stumbling toward her. "Please, I'll pay you. I have money, anything you want. I have to go with you." She looked me up and down, taking in my city dweller hiking clothes, my terrified face, the scrape on the back of my head. "You'll be a liability. This isn't a walk in the park." "I don't care," I insisted, my voice thick with desperation. "I'm not leaving her out there. I'll do whatever you say, please." The woman, Anna, as I'd later learn her name was, stared at me for a long moment. I could see the debate in her eyes. Finally, she let out a slow sigh, a small cloud in the cold air. "Fine," she said, her tone sharp as flint. "But you do exactly what I say. No questions, no arguments. You make one wrong move. You stop being my problem and start being bait. Understand?" I nodded, my heart pounding with a terrifying mixture of gratitude and dread. "I understand." "Good," she said, turning to the wolf. "Shadow, find the trail." The great wolf dipped its head, its nose to the ground, and began to move, not back toward the vanished tracks, but at an angle into a different, darker part of the forest. Anna Blackwood followed, not even looking back to see if I was coming. I scrambled to retrieve my flashlight and hurried after them, a ghost chasing a phantom into the heart of the nightmare. We moved through the forest at a pace that was both grueling and unnervingly quiet. I expected Anna to follow the path I had, to scrutinize the ground for the tracks that had vanished. She didn't. She barely looked down at all. Her head was up, her eyes constantly scanning the canopy, the tree trunks, the very air itself. Shadow, the giant wolf, trotted 20 feet ahead of us, a silent gray wraith navigating the darkness with an assurance that was both beautiful and terrifying. "It doesn't leave a trail you can see with your eyes," she said, her voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the air. It was the first thing she'd said in half an hour. "Not for long. It leaves a spiritual scent, a wrongness in the woods. That's what he's tracking." She gestured with her chin toward the wolf. My mind, desperate for information, for any kind of reassurance, was a buzzing hive of questions. What is it? Why did it take her? Where? Quiet, she cut me off, not with anger, but with the sharp authority of a surgeon in an operating room. First lesson. Sound travels, especially a voice like yours full of city noise and fear. We speak only when we have to. We use whispers. We use hand signals. Noise is a dinner bell in these woods. Got it? I nodded dumbly, my mouth closing with a click. For the next hour, we communicated with little more than gestures. A raised hand to halt. a pointed finger towards something she wanted me to see. I learned to walk differently, to place my feet deliberately, rolling from heel to toe, to minimize the crunch of leaves and the snap of twigs. It was the first lesson. Silence. The second lesson was observation. Periodically, Anna would stop and point to something I would have walked past without a second glance. A set of deep, parallel scratches scored into the bark of a fir tree, 12 feet off the ground. "No bear can reach that high or has claws that fine," she whispered, her breath fogging in the cold. Later, she indicated a patch of moss on a large boulder that had been violently scraped away, as if something had used it to clean its claws. She showed me a sapling bent to the ground at an impossible, unnatural angle, its wood splintered but not broken. "The forest is a book," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the bent tree. "Everything that happens here leaves a mark. You just have to learn the language." I was a tourist in a land where she was a native. The world I knew, the one with stoplights and deadlines and Wi-Fi, felt a million miles away. It felt like a flimsy stage set that had been torn down, revealing the raw, terrifying reality behind it. Why doesn't anyone know about this? I finally dared to ask in a hushed tone. About things like Wendigos? She gave me a sideways glance, her expression unreadable. They do. They just don't believe what they see. A person vanishes, it's a mountain lion attack or they got lost. Strange tracks are a hoax. A glimpse of something impossible in the fog is a trick of the light. Your world has built a thick wall of logic to protect itself from what it doesn't understand. But here, in places like this, that wall is thin. The other world, the one that's always been here, bleeds through. The journey was a brutal physical test. My pre-hike training was for well-marked trails with gentle inclines. This was different. We scrambled up slick, moss-covered slopes, using roots and rocks as handholds. We waded through streams so cold they felt like fire, the icy water soaking my boots and pants. My legs ached, my lungs burned, and every muscle screamed in protest. Anna, however, moved with an economy of motion that was almost inhuman. She never seemed to tire, never stumbled, her body perfectly in sync with the hostile terrain. She was as much a part of this forest as the trees and the shadows. A few hours before what I guessed was dawn, we came across a sight that made the bile rise in my throat. Tucked in a small clearing was the carcass of a bull elk. It hadn't been killed on the ground. It had been impaled, lifted a good 10 feet into the air, and skewered on a thick, sharpened branch of a dead pine tree. Its body was mostly intact, but its stomach had been slit open, its entrails hanging down in grotesque, steaming ropes. It wasn't for food. "It's marking its territory," Anna said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She was studying the scene with a professional, detached air. "And it enjoys cruelty. This is a bad one." As we pressed on, the forest itself seemed to turn against me. I started hearing things, a whisper on the wind that sounded so much like Madison's voice it made my head snap around. The sharp crack of a twig just behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing but empty darkness. A fleeting movement in my peripheral vision, a tall, thin shape that vanished the moment I tried to focus on it. "Don't listen," Anna commanded, noticing my distress. "It's playing with you. It can feel your fear. It feeds on it. Starve it." Her words were like a splash of cold water, but it was a hard command to follow. The fear was a living thing inside me, a parasite with its hooks deep in my soul. How was I supposed to starve something that was eating me alive from the inside out? As the first hint of gray began to dilute the oppressive black of the sky, Anna led us off our path and into a small hollow, sheltered by a granite overhang that jutted out from the base of a hill. It was a defensible spot, with a clear view of the approach. "We rest here," she announced. "Traveling in the twilight hours is foolish. It's when things hunt." She built a fire, but not like the cheerful, roaring blaze Madison and I had made. Hers was small, contained, built in a shallow pit. She used a specific type of dried, stringy moss that caught a spark instantly and burned with a low, intense heat, producing almost no smoke. "A big fire is a beacon," she explained, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Ours is just for warmth. It says, 'We are here,' not 'come and get us.'" The warmth seeped into my chilled bones, a small comfort in a world of terror. As I gnawed on a protein bar from my pack, one of the few things Anna had allowed me to keep, I watched her. She sat cross-legged, sharpening her long knife on a whetstone, her movements fluid and rhythmic. Shadow lay at her feet, his massive head resting on his paws, but his yellow eyes were open, constantly scanning the darkness beyond our small circle of light. "Who are you?" I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. "Really?" She didn't stop her work, the soft shk-shk of steel on stone the only sound for a long moment. I thought she was going to ignore me or tell me to be quiet again. "My family has lived in these mountains for a long time," she said finally, her voice low. "Long before they were called the Olympics. My ancestors, they made a pact of a sort with the old things, the spirits of this place." She looked up from her knife, her dark eyes meeting mine in the firelight. "We are meant to be keepers of the balance. We make sure the things from the other side of the wall don't cause too much trouble for your world, and that your world doesn't completely destroy this one." A sad, tired smile touched her lips for a fraction of a second. "There aren't many of us left." My gaze drifted to the immense wolf at her side. "And him? What is he?" "Shadow isn't a wolf. Not really," she said, reaching down to scratch the great beast behind the ears. He rumbled with a low, contented growl. "He's a familiar. A spirit bound to my bloodline. Our minds, our senses, they're connected. He is my eyes and ears and teeth when I need them to be." The explanation was delivered so matter-of-factly that it was more believable than any wild tale of magic could ever be. It explained their perfect, unspoken coordination. Later, as a true and deep night fell, the psychological assault began again, but this time it was worse. A scream tore through the forest, so close it sounded like it was just beyond the overhang. It was a woman's scream, high-pitched and full of agony. It sounded exactly like Madison. I leaped to my feet, my heart seizing. Maddie. "Stay put!" Anna's hand shot out and grabbed my arm with surprising strength. She forced me back down. "It's a lure. That's not her. It's the Wendigo, mimicking her voice. It's waiting for you to run out of the firelight." As if on cue, Shadow rose to his feet. He didn't bark, but a deep, menacing growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground. He stared into the blackness, and after a moment the screaming stopped, replaced once more by that heavy, listening silence. Sleep, when it finally came, was no escape. It was a swamp of nightmares. I saw Madison pale and still, locked inside a cage made of blackened branches. And all around her, swirling in a thick gray fog, were faces. Dozens of them, all disconnected from bodies. They were like masks, their eyes empty sockets, their mouths frozen in silent screams. I woke with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat. The images burned onto the backs of my eyelids. When the first light of true dawn touched the sky, Anna was already awake, examining the ground around our camp. She pointed to a series of tracks in the soft dirt, just at the edge of where the firelight had reached. The same three-toed prints I'd seen back at my own ruined campsite. It was here, she confirmed, watching us, studying us. She looked up at the mountains looming over us. It's patient, cunning beyond any animal. It won't attack head-on if it senses strength. It will wait. It will try to wear us down, to separate us. Before we set out, she handed me a small, rough object tied to a leather thong. It was a bear claw lashed to a small piece of dark, polished wood. "Wear this," she said. "It's not armor, but it will cloud your fear, dampen the scent of it. To that thing, your terror is like blood in the water to a shark." I slipped the amulet over my head, the smooth wood cool against my skin. It felt like a fool's hope, a child's trinket against a titan. But it was all I had. We packed our meager camp and began to climb, heading toward the bare, rocky peaks that scraped against the belly of the sky. The character of the forest changed as we ascended. The lush, moss-draped giants of the lower elevations gave way to hardier, more twisted pines that clung to the rocky soil. The air grew thin and cold, and the ground underfoot became a treacherous mix of loose scree and sharp-edged stone. We were entering the high country, a world of rock and wind. "Move slowly here," Anna cautioned in a near whisper, her hand held up to halt me. And quietly, "We are crossing someone else's land now. Its owner is not hostile as long as we show respect." We were navigating a narrow pass, a tight canyon with sheer rock walls rising 100 feet on either side. The silence here was different. It wasn't the menacing, expectant silence of the lower forest. It was a profound, ancient quiet, the quiet of stone and sky. As we rounded a sharp bend, I felt it, a palpable, heavy gaze pressing down on me. It wasn't the hateful, hungry presence of the Wendigo. This was something else entirely, something old and observant. I lifted my head, my eyes scanning the ridge of the canyon wall above us. And then I saw him. My breath caught in my throat. Standing on a rocky outcrop about 50 yards above us was a massive, man-like figure covered in thick, dark brown hair. It stood perfectly still, its broad shoulders slumped slightly, its powerful arms hanging at its sides. A Sasquatch. Bigfoot. It wasn't a myth. It was real, and it was watching us with an expression of what I could only describe as solemn curiosity. It radiated an aura of immense power, but there was no menace in it. Anna stopped beside me. She didn't reach for her knife or bow. Instead, she simply stood still for a moment, then gave a slow, slight nod in the creature's direction. A gesture of acknowledgement, of respect. For a long moment, the creature just watched us. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised one of its huge, human-like hands in a gesture that wasn't quite a wave, but more of a quiet salute. Just as slowly, it turned and walked away from the ledge, disappearing into the rocks with a silence that seemed impossible for a creature of its size. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. I finally found my voice, a choked whisper. What was that? The Sasquatch. The forest people, Anna said, her voice full of a reverence I hadn't heard before. The old ones. They are an ancient and intelligent species. They saw the path your world was taking a long time ago and chose a different one. A path of silence, of hiding. She started walking again. They are the silent witnesses to everything that happens in these woods. They do not interfere unless the woods themselves are threatened. The encounter cracked open my understanding of the world even further. The Wendigo was a monster, an aberration. This creature was something else. It was a part of the natural order. Just a part that had been relegated to folklore. How many more are there? I asked, my voice hushed with awe. How many different things? The forest is full of life you don't see, she replied, picking her way carefully over the loose rocks. Most are neither good nor evil. They simply are. They live by their own laws, same as any wolf or eagle. The Wendigo, though, it is a sickness, a cancer. It's a violation of the natural order. That's why it must be hunted. It doesn't belong. The pieces were starting to form a terrifying, unbelievable picture. A hidden ecosystem of myth and legend existing just beyond the veil of human perception. Why do they hide? I asked, thinking of the Sasquatch's melancholy eyes. Why not reveal themselves? Anna gave a short, bitter laugh. Because they know that man is the most dangerous, unpredictable predator on the planet, she said, her voice hard. It's an instinct they've learned over centuries. They saw what your people did to the passenger pigeons and the bison. They see the rivers you poison and the forests you clear-cut. They have no desire to be the next endangered species in your textbooks. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was right. We, in our arrogance, had defined the world, and anything that didn't fit our definition was either a monster to be slain or a resource to be exploited. After crossing the high pass, we began our descent into a new valley. The landscape changed dramatically. The crisp mountain air was replaced by a damp, stagnant atmosphere. The trees here were different, stunted, twisted things, their branches clawing at a sky that was perpetually overcast, even though the sun should have been high. Ahead of us, at the base of a cliff face, was a dark opening, a wound in the rock from which a palpable cold and the smell of damp earth and decay emanated. A cave. Anna stopped at the entrance, her expression grim. The valley floor is a maze of bogs and deadfall. We'd lose hours, make too much noise. The direct path is underground. A wave of claustrophobia washed over me. The thought of entering that dark, tight space was almost as terrifying as the creature we were hunting. But I looked at Anna's resolute face, and I knew I had no choice but to follow. The entrance to the cave was a narrow fissure, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, half hidden by gnarled, grasping roots. Anna ducked inside without hesitation. She lit a small, handcrafted oil lamp, its flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows that made the darkness seem even more profound. The light was a fragile, precious thing in the suffocating blackness. Shadow, the great wolf, flattened his ears and whined softly, a low note of anxiety, but he pressed on, staying close to Anna's heels. My heart hammered against my ribs as I forced myself to follow them into the gut of the earth. We hadn't gone more than 100 feet when the sound started. It was a dry, scratching, skittering sound, coming from all around us, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It was the sound of 1,000 tiny claws on stone. Against the wall. "Don't move," Anna commanded, her voice a sharp, urgent whisper. I pressed my back against the cold, damp rock, my eyes wide with terror. From small burrows and cracks in the cave walls, things began to emerge. They were pale, sightless creatures, like monstrously oversized, naked mole rats, but they moved with a horrifying, insect-like speed. Their bodies were fleshy and pink, but their heads were armed with powerful jaws filled with needle-sharp teeth, and their front paws were equipped with long, wicked claws designed for digging through rock and flesh. Grave diggers, Anna breathed, her knife already in her hand. Drawn by our warmth, our scent, our very life, the creatures swarmed us. They weren't intelligent or strategic. They were a mindless, hungry tide. Shadow became a whirlwind of gray fur and lethal motion. He was brutally efficient, his jaws snapping spines, his powerful paws crushing skulls. He was a living, breathing weapon, holding the main swarm at bay. Anna moved to cover his flank, her long knife a blur of silver in the lamplight. She dispatched the diggers that tried to get around the wolf with quick, precise slashes and stabs, her movements economical and deadly. And me? I was useless, a statue of terror. One of the creatures, breaking from the main fray, launched itself directly at me. I cried out, instinctively shoving my backpack forward. The digger's claws tore into the heavy-duty cordura fabric, its teeth snapping inches from my face. In that split second of tangled chaos, Shadow lunged, seizing the creature by the scruff of its neck and flinging it against the far wall with a sickening crunch. The reality of my situation slammed into me. In this world, I wasn't a participant. I was baggage. I was prey. The fight was over as quickly as it began. The surviving diggers melted back into their tunnels, leaving a dozen mangled, twitching bodies on the cave floor. Anna quickly checked me over, her eyes scanning for any wounds. "They're blind and stupid," she said, her breath coming a little faster now. "They react to heat and movement, but there are always more of them, and they don't know fear." We pressed on, the lamplight illuminating a path that grew wider. We soon entered a vast, cavernous grotto, the ceiling lost in the darkness above. The ground here was littered with bones, animal bones mostly, deer, elk, bear, but among them, unmistakably, were human ones. Skulls, ribs, femurs, scattered like refuse. In the center of the massive chamber stood a grotesque, altar-like structure, crudely built from skulls and other large bones. This was where the grave diggers brought their grisly trophies. It was a charnel house, a testament to the unceasing, mindless hunger that ruled these depths, and it was a sign that we were going the right way. Further on, a faint gray light appeared in the distance. Hope surged in me, a desperate desire for open air and sunlight. We navigated a final, narrow tunnel and emerged from the cave. But the light that greeted us wasn't the warm, welcoming sun I'd prayed for. We had stepped out into the valley, but it was a place of perpetual twilight. The sky was a sickly, bruised gray, barely visible through the canopy of diseased-looking trees whose branches intertwined overhead, forming a dense, suffocating dome that choked out the sun. The air was still and heavy, and the silence was absolute. We had left the world of the living and entered a mausoleum. We stood at the edge of a bleak, swampy valley. The air was thick and cloying, smelling of rot and stagnant water. The trees here were nightmarish things, twisted and gnarled as if in constant agony, their bark peeling, their branches draped in a pale, leprous moss. What little light penetrated the oppressive canopy was a diffuse, gloomy gray, casting no true shadows, only deepening the sense of decay. The silence was a physical pressure, a weight on my eardrums. As we picked our way forward, the ground sucking at my waterlogged boots, I began to notice them. Hanging from the low-hanging branches of the twisted trees were masks, dozens of them. Some were crude, fashioned from scraped bark and mud. Others were disturbingly detailed, sculpted from pale clay and woven with what looked chillingly like human hair. Each one was a face, a unique expression frozen in time. Some were serene, some confused, but most were contorted in a silent, unending scream. They swayed gently in the dead air. A gallery of stolen souls. "We're close," Anna whispered, her voice tight. "Now you see what we're dealing with. This isn't just a Wendigo. It's an ancient variant, a specialized one. We call it the Face Stealer." She pointed a gloved finger at the nearest mask, a horrifyingly realistic depiction of a man with a thick mustache, his eyes wide with terror. "Those aren't trophies," she explained, her voice dropping even lower. "They're containers, husks. It doesn't just steal a life, it steals the self, the personality, the memories, the essence of who a person is. It leaves behind an empty doll, but the ritual takes time. It needs to prepare. That's why Maddie might still be alive." The ground became a marshy quagmire. Here and there, bones and entire skeletons jutted from the black, soupy earth. They were frozen in awful positions, some half-buried as if they'd been trying to crawl away, others with skeletal arms reaching toward the gray sky in a final, unheard plea for help. These were the ones whose masks were finished. The empty dolls left behind. The psychic assault on my mind intensified tenfold. The whispers were no longer just on the wind. They were inside my head, clear as day. "Caleb, where are you? Caleb, help me." The psychic assault on my mind intensified tenfold. The whispers were no longer just on the wind. They were inside my head, clear as day. "Caleb, where are you? Caleb, help me." It was Madison's voice, pleading, terrified, seeming to come from every direction at once. I saw flashes of movement at the edge of my vision. A tall, gaunt shape darting between trees, always disappearing the moment I turned to look. The air grew colder, charged with a palpable hatred. Anna's hand clamped down on my arm, her grip like steel. "Breathe," she commanded, her dark eyes boring into mine. "It's an illusion. He's close, and he's trying to separate us. Don't let him." We finally emerged from the swampy woods onto a large, circular clearing. The ground here was different. It was utterly barren, a circle of scorched, cracked earth where nothing grew, as if the very soil had been poisoned. The place radiated a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature, a deep, seething malice that felt like it was trying to suffocate my soul. Anna pointed toward the center of the clearing. "The lair." She stopped and shrugged off her pack. From it, she pulled 2 tightly wrapped bundles of pitch-soaked rags tied to sturdy branches. Torches. She handed one to me. Its weight felt both pathetic and immense. "Fire," she said, her voice grim. "It's the one thing it truly fears. Not like an animal fears it, but like a disease fears a cure. Like darkness fears the dawn. It's a cleansing force. When I give the signal, you light it. And whatever happens, Caleb, do not let that flame go out." I clutched the unlit torch, my knuckles white. My fear was a solid, icy lump in my stomach. But looking at the barren, hate-filled ground, I felt a spark of something new ignite alongside it. Rage. We were coming for her. And we would burn this whole rotten place to the ground. In the center of the blighted clearing stood the source of the valley's corruption. It wasn't a cave or a hut, but a grotesque, nest-like altar woven from blackened branches, human and animal bones, and solidified filth. It rose a good 15 feet from the ground, a monument to decay and suffering, and suspended near its peak, hanging from thick, sinewy vines, was a crude cage made of heavy interwoven boughs. Inside it was Madison. She was lying on her side, still and unmoving. From this distance, she looked unharmed, but her face, even in the dim light, was slack and unnervingly vacant. It was the face of a doll, devoid of the life and fire that made her her. Seeing her like that, a possession in this monster's larder, sent a shockwave of cold fury through me, momentarily drowning out the fear. The moment our boots touched the edge of the barren circle, the ground itself seemed to exhale. A thick, unnaturally cold fog began to rise from the cracked earth. It wasn't a natural mist. It was a greasy, opaque vapor that swirled and coiled around our ankles, then our waists, quickly swallowing the landscape. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. The world shrank to a tiny, claustrophobic bubble of gray. Then came the voices. The fog carried sound, amplified it. It wasn't just Madison's voice anymore. It was a chorus of torment. The screams and pleas of dozens of victims, men, women, children, all blending into a single cohesive symphony of agony. It was the sound of every soul whose face now hung on a tree in this damned valley. Shapes began to move in the fog, tall, fleeting shadows that darted across the edge of our vision. Something huge and fast was circling us, staying just out of sight within the swirling mist. A dry, rasping sound echoed from the fog, the scrape of claws on stone, a sound that set my teeth on edge.
"Light it, now!"
Anna yelled, her voice cutting through the cacophony. She struck a piece of flint against the steel of her knife. Sparks flew, catching on a piece of tinder. She blew it to life and plunged it into the head of her torch, which erupted in a brilliant, angry blossom of orange flame. She immediately thrust it toward my torch. The pitch-soaked rags caught instantly. The light was a physical force. It pushed the fog back, creating a small 10-foot circle of safety around us. The wall of mist roiled at the edge of the light, as if afraid to cross the threshold. "Keep it high," Anna shouted over the screaming voices.
"Hold it in front of you, don't let it get behind you."
Shadow, who had been standing rigid at Anna's side, let out a low, rumbling growl that was pure menace. His yellow eyes, burning like embers in the gloom, were locked on a point in the fog. He wasn't waiting for a command. He saw something I couldn't. With a silent explosion of muscle, he launched himself from our circle of light and disappeared into the gray wall of mist. A split second later, the air was filled with a high-pitched, inhuman shriek, the sound of a brutal impact, and the ferocious, snarling fury of the wolf. The battle had begun. The violent struggle happening just out of sight in the fog gave me my first clear look at our enemy. A furious snarl from Shadow was followed by the sound of something heavy being thrown. The Wendigo was flung backward, stumbling out of the mist and into the edge of our firelight for a single horrifying second. What I saw defied sanity. It was tall, at least 8 feet, and emaciated to the point of being a walking skeleton covered in taut, gray skin. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in those 3-fingered claws that looked like obsidian razors. But the head, it had no head. In its place, growing from its shoulders and upper back, was a grotesque, cancerous cluster of human skulls. Perhaps 5 or 6 of them, all fused together, facing different directions with their empty, accusing eye sockets. The newest one, still bearing scraps of pale flesh, was clearly that of a woman. It was a monument of stolen identities. The creature moved with a sickening, mercurial speed. It didn't run. It seemed to flicker, dissolving into the fog in one spot and reappearing yards away an instant later. This unnatural teleportation made it a nightmare for Shadow. The wolf was fast, but he was attacking a target that was constantly displacing itself. A flicker, and the Wendigo was suddenly behind him, its claws raking 4 deep, bloody gashes across the wolf's flank. Shadow yelped in pain but spun around, relentless, seeing its primary threat momentarily injured. The Wendigo turned its attention to me. Its conglomeration of skulls swiveled, and multiple pairs of empty sockets fixed on me, the weakest link. It let out a dry, hissing sound and lunged. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but my feet were lead. Anna's words echoed in my head. Do not let the flame go out. Driven by pure animal instinct, I thrust the burning torch forward like a spear. The creature stopped dead, skidding to a halt just a few feet away. It recoiled from the flames, a hateful, guttural hiss escaping from somewhere within its chest. The skulls on its back all turned to stare at me, and a chorus of venomous whispers flooded my mind, a wave of pure psychic hatred that made me stagger. "Caleb!" Anna's scream cut through the psychic static. The Wendigo, distracted by my defiance, had left itself open. Shadow, ignoring his wounds, charged again, but the creature was too quick. It swatted the massive wolf aside with a contemptuous backhand, sending him tumbling to Anna's feet, where he lay whimpering. For a moment I felt the icy certainty of failure. But then Anna screamed again. It was not a scream of fear. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated fury, a sound that was not entirely human. Her body contorted. I heard the sickening, wet crack of bones breaking and resetting. Her spine elongated, her limbs thickened, her skin tore as coarse, gray fur erupted from it. Her face stretched into a feral muzzle, teeth lengthening into fangs. In the space of 5 heartbeats, Anna Blackwood was gone. In her place stood a monster of legend, a creature of nightmare and power, a werewolf, a bipedal engine of destruction, a perfect fusion of human intelligence and beastly rage. She wasn't Shadow's master. She was his kin. The keeper of the balance was a lycanthrope. This was the true power of her bloodline. The newly transformed Anna let out a howl that silenced the ghostly chorus in the fog and charged the Wendigo. The fight was no longer a chase. It was a brawl. Where Shadow had relied on speed, the werewolf Anna brought overwhelming, brutal strength. She met the Wendigo's claw strikes with her own, blocking and parrying. The air filled with the shriek of claw on claw. She was strong enough to match it, and smart enough to predict its flickering movements. She drove it back, her own claws tearing away strips of its gray, leathery hide. The Wendigo shrieked in pain and fury, its movements growing more erratic, more desperate. Sensing its impending defeat, the creature made one last, desperate gambit. It ignored the werewolf and flickered again, appearing directly in front of me, lunging for the kill. Again, I thrust the torch forward. The flames licked at its desiccated skin, and it flinched back with a scream of agony. That single second of hesitation was all the opening Anna needed. The werewolf lunged, her powerful hands clamping onto one of the skulls on the creature's back, the fresh one. With a roar of effort that shook the clearing, she tore it free from the fleshy mass. The Wendigo let out a sound that was not of this earth. It was a deafening, soul-shattering shriek of pure agony as its physical form and the stolen spirits within it were ripped asunder. The creature's body began to smoke and disintegrate, crumbling into black dust. The skulls, the bones, the gray skin, all of it dissolved into nothingness. As the last particle of dust vanished, the cold, greasy fog dissipated, rising from the ground and vanishing into the gray sky as if it had never been. The silence that fell over the clearing was absolute and sudden. The screaming chorus of the dead was gone, replaced by the whisper of a clean wind moving through the twisted trees for the first time in what felt like centuries. On the blighted ground where the Wendigo had stood, there was nothing left but a small patch of greasy black ash, that the wind was already beginning to scatter. Anna, her chest heaving, slowly shrank back into her human form. The transformation was just as visceral in reverse, a grim reassembly of bone and flesh. She stood naked, covered in a mixture of her own blood and the black ichor of the monster. I quickly looked away, my mind reeling, and fumbled in my pack for the emergency foil blanket. By the time I turned back, she had already pulled a dark cloak from her own pack and wrapped it around herself. Shadow, limping heavily but alive, padded to her side and licked the blood from her hand. I didn't waste a second. While my mind was still trying to stitch together the impossible things I'd just witnessed, my body moved on autopilot. I ran to the foul altar, scrambling up the slippery bone and grime-caked structure. The branches were sharp and brittle. I reached the cage and, using my survival knife, sawed frantically at the thick, tough vines holding the door shut. They finally gave way. I eased the door open and gently, carefully lifted Madison into my arms. She was limp, a dead weight, but she was warm. I could feel the slow, steady beat of her heart against my chest. I half climbed, half slid back down to the ground, cradling her as if she were made of glass. "This place needs to be cleansed," Anna said, her voice rough and tired. She took her torch, the flames still burning brightly, and thrust it into the base of the nightmarish altar. The dry, dead wood and bone caught instantly, erupting in a whoosh of flame. I flinched back, shielding Madison. "The fire? Will it spread to the forest?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "No," Anna said, watching the pyre burn with an impassive expression. "Nothing living will grow on this land for 100 years. The fire will only take what is already dead." The flames roared, a furious, cleansing inferno consuming the last vestiges of the face-stealer's evil. The journey back was a long, grueling haze. I carried Madison on my back, her head resting on my shoulder. She was so light. The forest no longer felt actively malevolent. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by the gentle, normal sounds of birds and rustling leaves. Anna and the limping shadow led us back through the labyrinthine woods, not to the cave, but along a different, safer path. They escorted us to the edge of their world, stopping at the very same Stony Creek bed where I had first lost the trail and then found them. "You can follow the water down from here," Anna said, pointing downstream. "It will lead you to a marked trail within a mile. You'll be fine." I gently lowered Madison to the ground, propping her against a mossy log. I turned to Anna, my mind a jumble of inadequate words. "How do you thank someone for walking through hell with you, for saving the person you love, for revealing the true shape of the universe, and not leaving you insane?" "Anna, Forget it," she said, her tone not unkind but firm. "Forget everything you saw here for your sake and for hers." She looked at Madison's peaceful, sleeping face. She won't remember the details. Her mind will protect her. Turn it into a nightmare she'll soon forget. Let it. The truth is a heavier burden than you think. With a final brief nod, she turned. She and Shadow melted back into the deep woods, vanishing as silently and completely as they had first appeared. It was morning by the time I staggered back to our campsite. The shredded tent, a grim reminder of where this had all begun. I carefully laid Madison down in her sleeping bag inside the wreckage. An hour later, as the sun finally climbed over the mountaintops, her eyes fluttered open. She blinked, squinting at the torn nylon above her. She brought a hand to her head, wincing. "Oh man," she groaned. "I had the worst nightmare. Just awful. I dreamed I was trapped in a cage made of sticks, and there were all these horrible screaming masks flying around me in a fog." I looked at her beautiful familiar face. her eyes filled with confusion but not the deep, soul-crushing terror that now lived permanently in mine. I looked at the scratches on my arms, felt the deep ache in my bones, and remembered the sight of a cluster of skulls where a head should be. I remembered Anna's words. The truth is a heavier burden. I made my choice. "It was just a bad dream, Maddie," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. I leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Just a bad dream? Let's pack up and get the hell out of here." As we drove away, leaving the silent, watchful mountains behind, I kept my eyes on the road. But in the rearview mirror, I could see more than just the receding trees. I could see the shadow of the world that lies just beyond our own, and I knew I would carry the weight of that knowledge alone, forever.